In this video, we're going to take a look at file permissions and how you may have problems with them, and if you do, some strategies to avoid those problems. So here I am on a freshly installed instance of WordPress, and I'm going to check out this sample page. And I can see it's got this kind of ugly URL. WordPress's permalinks settings can help me change that so it can be something like v2b.shoeflydesign.org/sample page, or something nice that's actually indicative of its content. So we'll switch over to the dashboard and take a look. So what I do is I'll just choose one of these other formats and click Save Changes. Okay, so it looks like it worked. The setting took, but I get this little message up here. I don't know what that means, but I'll switch back over here and reload this page. Whoa, hey, okay. I got a nice URL, but now nothing's happening. So I'm going to go back here and look. And I'm going to take another look at this page and scroll down. And here's the important bit. If your htaccess file were writable, we could do this automatically. So what this means is that WordPress was not able to create or edit a file called htaccess, and it wasn't able to add this content to it. So under normal circumstances, under normal operations, WordPress would be able to do this. But there's something in the configuration of my web hosting account that is preventing it from being able to do that. So I'm going to open up my FTP client and log in. That's already done here, and here we are. So I'm going to go into my public HTML folder, make sure this listing is fresh. Okay, I do have an htaccess file, but WordPress says that it couldn't write to it. So to step back, web hosting accounts are multi-user systems typically. Your web hosting account is one of many on that computer, that is the server, and each individual customer has a user account with a username and password. Also on the same server, there is often another user, which is a global user that controls every process that actually serves the websites. So frequently the server is a piece of software called Apache, and there may be a username, Apache, or nobody, or something like that. The setups vary by hosting provider, but you may be running into a situation where that user needs to have permission to write to that file. Another situation you may have, and this is the way my hosting is set up, is that the web server runs as me, but I need to make sure that I have permission to write to all these various files, and I need to make sure that I can create those files. So we need to take a look at the permissions of the directories and the files of interest. So let's switch back to the FTP application, and let's take a look at the htaccess file. So I'm going to get info on this. Depending on your file transfer client, the command may be called getinfo, it may be called properties, but something like that should be able to give you more information on this file. So here we are, and the part that I'm particularly interested in is permissions. A lot of times these are presented as checkboxes, as they are here. Sometimes they're presented in the numeric fashion, which is very common to Unix, which is right here as well. So what do these mean? User, which is also sometimes displayed as owner, is you. That's the user who owns the files. You're the customer. Group is something that we will not get into. It's an implementational detail of the different hosting providers. It's unlikely that you're going to need to play with these. World means everyone. That is, everyone who has an account on the computer that your web hosting account is running on. These permissions affect those people. So that's who these are. Now, what these are is a little different. Read means that you can read the files, you can see their contents. Write means that you can edit their contents. And execute is another Unix implementation detail that sort of means it's kind of like findability or the ability to execute a file as a program. So in this case, I can see that nobody at all has write permissions to this file. So the first thing I'm going to do is try and give myself permission to write to it. So I'm going to check this box and click Apply. I'm going to go back here and reload this page, which means it's asking if I want to recommit my attempt at confirming these settings. I do, so I'll click Continue. Okay, permalink structure updated. No extra messages down here. That means it must have worked. So let's go back here, click Reload, and try it. And it works. Okay, so I know that in my setup, I needed to make sure that I have write permissions to this particular file. If you're in a situation like mine, where your username is the one that owns these files, most of the time this is not a situation that you will see. But every once in a while, your permissions can get changed on different files or directories, and so this is something you need to be prepared to look for and diagnose. Often your hosting provider can help you. Now I'm going to show you another couple of places where you might run into this. So we'll close this and switch back. Let's take a look at the dashboard again. I can see I have an update for a plugin here. So let's take a look at that. Okay, there's a new version of this plugin available. It's a very minor update. So let's take a look at its details. It's compatible with this version of WordPress. So I'm going to try installing it. Keep in mind, you should always have a backup when you do this. I'm not going to go through that just because this is only a demonstration. But here we go. Okay, now WordPress has asked me for FTP information. While I'm sure this works, I'm not particularly comfortable with the idea of storing my FTP information on the server. I'm sure WordPress does a fine job with this, but I don't want to store that information on the server because I'm a little paranoid. I don't want it to be stored on the server where conceivably, if there were a security breach, someone would be able to get my information. So I know from past experience that this is another indication of a permissions problem. So let's take a look at where plugins are stored. Switching back to my FTP client, plugins are stored in the WP content folder. So I'll open that and check the plugins folder by getting info on it. Okay, the permissions look fine here. So the next thing that I usually will do is check the parent directory. So I'll go up a level to WP content and I'll check that. Aha! User does not have write permissions here either. So I'm going to click this checkbox, click Apply, and switch back. Okay, I'm going to try and run this update again. This time it worked, so the permissions are okay here. Good. So you will see this in different places where WordPress tries to update files. Your updates is one, your permalink settings is another, various plugins, whether they need to be updated or whether you're actually working with them and they create files of their own, that's another place where you might see this. Under Appearance, you have a theme editor. If you've ever used this, or if you ever plan to use this to make edits to a theme, I can't say I recommend that. I find it better to use a standalone text editor. But this function is available, and WordPress needs to be able to write to these files for this to be useful. So that's another area where you may see this. So anytime you run into an error where WordPress says, I don't think I have permission to do something, I need to write to something, this is a class of problem that you might be dealing with. One more note about this. Depending on your hosting setup, there may be times where you are encouraged to set your permissions so everybody has write permission to something. You may see mentions of something called chmod 777, which provides permissions for everybody to be able to write to something. If you can possibly avoid doing this, you absolutely should. These days, most web hosting providers are moving into situations where your user is the one that controls your full web account, including the serving of it. And that's a much better setup because granting this level of permissions where everybody has write access means that any other account on the entire web server, which in many cases is hundreds of other customers, could have write access to one of your directories. That's a huge security vulnerability. Somebody could, if they knew the directory, dump a file into your account and then run a script out of there. You don't want to do that. So This is to be avoided. Don't give everybody write access. The particulars of how these are set up will vary by hosting company, so you'll want to talk to the support at your web hosting company to find out what the best setup is for your situation and your WordPress install. So that is an overview of file permissions issues and some things that you can do to avoid them.